Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. And we're here to make the world safe for ADHD. I am a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I'm in private practice. I see a whole bunch of ADHD kids and adults. I'm also the father of an adult with ADHD. I keep saying child, but he's kind of grown up now, so it doesn't really apply anymore. ADHDers are probably the most misunderstood diagnostic category of anybody I work with. The reason being, they don't look different. But their brains work differently, and their brains working differently causes them a lot of problems that a lot of people look at and say, well, he's just being a pain in the butt. He's just being a willful child. He's just being a spoiled brat, etc., etc. She is just one of those little princesses who likes to be in her own dream world all the time. Anyway, that's what these kids are told all the time. They, as a result, are prone to some difficulties consistently with depression and anxiety. And I started talking a little bit about that last time. I thought I'd go into anxiety in a little more detail this week, just because it's a big deal. I mean, anxiety is one of those things that tends to get worse as you go along. The more and more things you're afraid of, the more reluctant you are to try new things, the more restricted your world gets, and it goes on and on and on. And for some people, it ends up they can't leave their house, or they can't leave their apartment, or they can't leave their room. And life is not pleasant, shall we say, okay? It grows, it develops, okay? And like all the major emotions, there are three components. There's a cognitive component, there's an affective component, and there's a physiological component. I'll start from the bottom and go back up. Okay, the physiological component is that sensation that your heart's going to jump out of your chest, that you're tense, that your hands are shaking and maybe they're perspiring like crazy. Maybe your respiration rate is way up. Maybe you've got a little tremble going. And at the worst, you're in a full-blown panic attack, which is when you feel like you can't catch your breath. Basically, it's an extreme hyperventilation thing, but it still scares people. Okay, that's the physiological component. That's the one people can kind of look at and go, what the heck's wrong with you? Okay? The affective component is the emotion part. That's that feeling of being scared, and being scared all the time. And Christmas, especially if you're an adult, is an optimal time to have increased anxiety because there are so many obligations that you have to meet. And if you're the one who feels like he or she has to meet them all the time, that will cause increased anxiety. We frequently kind of disregard that and just think, oh, she's just anxious, just that kind of person, or he's just anxious, that kind of person. But it really does come from a combination of a tendency towards anxiety anyway that you've kind of developed over life, plus great fears that you're not going to be able to keep up and meet your obligations and do what you're supposed to do. The last one is the most important most important one, and it's the one that basically everything else stems from, and that's the cognitive component of, in this case, anxiety. The cognitive component is the thought process that underlies anxiety. Basically, the idea that something bad's going to happen. I'm not sure when, but I'm sure it's going to be terrible and horrible and awful. And, by the way, there's nothing I can do about it. Okay, and now, these are not things that people are born with. The genetics don't explain anxiety, okay? There does seem to be a correlation between how calm and placid a person is and how prone to excitation they are. But even that, we're not sure if it's a born-in thing or is it trained and learned. We have these caricatures, like all Norwegians are calm and placid and don't get excited about much, and all Italians are excitable and screechy and da-da-da-da-da. And all little French boys are the same. But it's really hard to tell if that's something you've inherited or if it's something you developed and learned. That's that way with a lot of human behavior and human emotions. But imagine that you are just starting school. You're, 5 or 6 years old, whatever it is now. We're not quite putting them in schools when they're still in diapers, but we're getting closer and closer. But so you're in school the first time, and you pretty much life has been not so bad. Maybe mom and dad yell at you a little more than they do your siblings, but not bad. And all of a sudden you're in this class with a whole bunch of other kids, and lo boy, there's a whole bunch going on. People are wiggling and talking and, just all kinds of stuff. And you get a little bit excited. You get a little bit stimulated, if you will. And then the teacher comes down on you, probably approaches from behind you. But, what are you doing? Sit down in your desk this minute. Or words to that effect. So, this is the first time a stranger has disciplined you. It also is the first time it's happened in a large group. I'm talking about more than your siblings or your immediate friends in the neighborhood. This is 20 or so other kids. Maybe more, with today's classrooms being what they are. And you have been publicly disciplined, which is humiliating, embarrassing, uncomfortable, and something you don't want to happen again or happen regularly. Then, at that stage of life, you don't know about ADHD. You don't know there's such a thing. And you certainly don't know that you've got it. You think for some reason you got picked, you got singled out. And you know what the next thing is? Crap, when's it going to happen again? So that's when the anxiety starts. That's when you're pretty sure it's going to happen again, but you're not sure when. And you're not sure what's going to happen, what you're going to do, or what you did do, or what you didn't do, or if you have any control over it at all. So you're always on guard. And then it gets worse because you start to realize you don't really have control over what you do that gets your teacher upset. I try to sit still, I just can't do it. I've heard that a lot. And it's true. If you're an ADHD person, especially if you're young, you have a terrible time trying to sit still. And schools increasingly have started demanding more and more sit-still time. You know, when I was a kid, we had lots of recesses, at least 2 a day. And you could get outside and run and get worn out and come back to class a little bit more relaxed. But nowadays, not so much. Nowadays, class days are longer and class periods are longer. And so-called efficiency experts keep trying to turn classrooms into factories without any regard for the human factor. But the deal that is common is that you've got ADHD, and you probably don't know it, and you don't know what that means, and maybe your parents don't even know yet either. They will learn eventually, but you start to develop anxiety. You start to develop a hypersensitivity, being afraid that you're going to do something wrong. And the worst part about that is you don't know how to control it, and you don't know how to make it not happen again. You just don't know. And even if you do know, the odds are pretty good that you won't be able to control it anyway. Bingo. Okay. You now officially have an anxiety disorder. And your anxiety will continue. And it will grow and develop. Especially if you're not getting any kind of treatment. And when you first start school, many people are not getting any kind of treatment. So, what's the first thing a parent should do? Well, one of the first things, of course, is get a good evaluation. I hate to keep emphasizing this, but you really need to have your child evaluated. And don't necessarily wait until the teacher gets fed up and finally says, look, I think he's got ADHD, or I think she does. How about getting an evaluation? You need to get them evaluated, okay? It'll save a whole bunch of trouble in the future, okay? It's not magic, but people always respond better to things when they know what's going on and they know the whys of what's happening. And until you know that you have ADHD, that it's a genetic condition that you inherited from somebody in your family tree, and it's a real thing, it's not a made-up thing, and it's not something that excuses you from all kinds of behaviors, but the consequences should be modulated. You know, you're not a bad kid. Matter of fact, that brings up, there's a book, what the heck, Kate Kelly and Peggy Raimondo. It's got the greatest title I've ever heard for ADHDers. The title is, You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Crazy, or Stupid? Because guess what? That's what ADHD kids hear. Oh, he'd do so much better if he'd just pay attention. Or, oh, she'd do so much better if she'd just try harder. These are statements made in disturbing ignorance of what's actually going on. So, ADHD parents, early evaluation helps minimize the development of other conditions in it. You know, the ADHD, you know, that's a given. You're either born with it or you're not. The anxiety and depression pieces of things are something that's developed in response to the ADHD. And it's not something that has to be. It's not, oh, well, it's a biological relationship or something. No, it's developed. It's something that is developed because of the ADHD and because of the ADHD in a compliance-based environment. Schools are designed in large part to teach people to do what they're told when they're told to do it. And ADHD kids have a horrible time with that. They don't work that way. Just because they might get punished if they don't do something, or if they do something, isn't going to be much of a thing that will keep them from doing it. You know, you've got a brain that's the brakes aren't very good on. If it were a car, Lord help us all, it would be a supercharged something or other with no brakes, or very limited brakes. So they go 90 miles an hour. They're typically pretty bright kids. They do a lot of thinking outside the box. But the impulse control piece of things, the modulation part of things, the slow down a little bit, the stop and think, not there. But you can get a handle on it as a parent and as an individual with ADHD. If you know what you've got, then you know there's a reason why you have problems with the things you have problems with. You know, why you're impulsive, why you sometimes say things you wish you hadn't said, why you start 10 projects and maybe finish one. All those sorts of things are because of ADHD, okay? And if you know that, at least you know one explanation. And then the next step is there's treatment for this stuff, okay? Once you know what you've got, you can do something about it, okay? I mean, I personally am a big fan of medications used appropriately. They work amazingly fast, for one darn thing. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been at conferences or something and had parents come up to me and say, oh, since we started him on that, medication, it's been like night and day. It's been great. Man, even his handwriting is better. Okay? It works. It's been around, the stimulant medication's been around since 1937. So we know that stuff works. We know that it has minimal side effects. And we know that it helps about 85-90% of everybody with ADHD, period. The big thing, I think, is that a proper diagnosis helps your child understand that there are reasons for his behaviors that don't have to do with him being a bad person or a lazy person or whatever else he may think. You can't buy that back, and it is real hard to build a person's self-esteem up once they've started down that road. But you've got to know that it's not because you're bad. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you're stupid either. And that sometimes gets confused for people. Like I said, I've said many times, I treat a lot of adults with ADHD, and a tremendous number of them are like in their late 20s, early 30s, and were either never diagnosed with ADHD, although it was probably suggested, or they dropped out of treatment prematurely and did the best they could. But now they're late 20s, early 30s, They're sick of having relationships that don't work out, marriages that end in divorce, jobs that end with them being fired or disciplined or demoted. Life is not very satisfying when things are going like that. So usually by that time, by the late 20s, early 30s, there's other things going on in addition. Many of them have been treated for anxiety and depression for 6 or 7 years by the time they get to me. The ADHD came first. The ADHD came before the anxiety and the depression. So, if you're a parent of an ADHD child or one who looks like he or she might be, do the right thing and get an evaluation. Doesn't cost that much, and it'll answer a lot of questions. And you're much better off if you know what's going on. I mean, even if your child ends up not having ADHD, a thorough evaluation will tell you some other areas to look at. It could be a primary anxiety disorder. It could be a primary obsessive compulsive disorder. It could be a learning disability. But you'll know. And when you know, then you can work on it effectively. You can get the right experts working with your child, or yourself for that matter, and well, you know what you're working on. It's hard to miss a target when it's moving on you, you know. It's easier if you've got something that's been designated and explained to you. Okay, and one other thing, given the time of year it is, people frequently at this time of year have more troubles with anxiety. If they are prone to it in the first place, it tends to get a little worse this time of year just because there are so many demands. And a lot of folks with anxiety tend to be perfectionists and don't want to make mistakes. And that includes not buying Uncle Bill a present he hates, and not burning the cookies, and making sure the pie turns out. Those are all things that people get anxious about. And keeping up with all the different social responsibilities, making sure we get to all the parties we're supposed to get to, and making sure we don't offend anybody in the neighborhood or whatnot. Those are all things that increase anxiety in folks who are prone to it. So, Merry Christmas. Or Happy Holidays, depending. Okay. We are done for this week. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. You can reach me at terrygingrasphd.com. You can leave a note or a question or a message somewhere around here. I never know if it's below or above or whatever. I think it's below. But anyway, and especially if there's a topic you'd like me to cover, be more than glad to look into, whatever your suggestions are. And in the meantime, remember, this is the show trying to make the world safe for ADHD, because ADHDers are outside-the-box thinkers. And those are the folks that are going to solve the big problems that we have, because compliant people never make big changes in other people's lives. So we need some of those people. We need a lot of them, okay? So let's take care of them and learn to cherish them, and I will catch you next time.